a forgotten briefcase, a scent of perfume that wasn't hers, and a sudden, last-minute flight to Geneva. For Isabelle Sterling, 7 months pregnant and married to a titan of finance, these were the tiny cracks splintering the facade of her perfect life. Her husband, Julian, was the king of a global empire, a man who commanded boardrooms and dazzled an adoring public. But in the hushed quiet of their Manhattan penthouse, a cold dread was blooming in Isabelle's heart, a dread that propelled her to do the unthinkable, follow him. She was about to board his private jet, uninvited. She thought she was searching for evidence of an affair, but what she would uncover at 40,000 feet would unravel a conspiracy so vast it would threaten to pull the sky down with it. The lie, like so many of Julian's, was seamless. It was delivered with the perfect blend of regret and urgency, a performance honed in boardrooms where billions were conjured from whispers and handshakes. "Angel, I'm so sorry," he'd murmured, his thumb stroking her cheek while his eyes were already distant, calculating. "The consortium in Geneva, they've moved the meeting up. A crisis with the Asian markets." He kissed her forehead, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring, but felt like a seal on a contract she hadn't read. "I have to go. Wheels up in 2 hours." Isabelle Sterling stood in the center of their sprawling penthouse, a hand resting protectively on the taut swell of her belly. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the baccarat crystal and casting long shadows that seemed to claw at the edges of their gilded life. From this height, New York City was a silent, glittering map of Julian's domain. He was Julian Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global Investments, a name synonymous with audacious success and ruthless ambition. And she was his wife, the poised, elegant accessory to his empire. But lately, she felt more like its prisoner. The pregnancy, their first child, was supposed to be the final perfect piece of their meticulously curated life. A son, Julian had declared with unnerving certainty to carry on the Sterling name. Yet instead of binding them closer, it had created a chasm. Julian had become more distant, his phone calls more secretive, his nights away more frequent. He'd explained it away as pressure, the relentless demands of a fluctuating global economy. Isabelle, who had once been a sharp-witted financial analyst herself before Julian, had persuaded her that her talents were better suited to managing their domestic portfolio, had initially accepted it. Now she wasn't so sure. The cracks had started as hairline fractures, a hushed conversation on the phone that abruptly ended when she entered the room. The faint alien scent of jasmine and sandalwood on a suit jacket he claimed had just returned from the dry cleaners. And then, the biggest crack of all, discovered just yesterday. While searching for a misplaced heirloom in his home office, she had found a small silver key tucked into the back of a desk drawer. It was for a locker at the exclusive Aura Wellness Spa, a place Julian had never mentioned frequenting. A cold knot of suspicion had tightened in her gut. 2 hours, she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "That's so sudden, Julian. Is everything all right? It's just business, Angel. A fire to be put out?" He was already moving his valet, appearing as if by magic with a pre-packed weekender bag. Julian checked his watch, a Patek Philippe, that cost more than most people's homes. "Don't worry about a thing. I'll call you the moment I land. You and our little man, just rest." He called the baby our little man, as if he were a future asset, an extension of the Sterling brand. The ease with which he dismissed her concern was the final jarring note. As he kissed her goodbye, a brief, sterile press of lips, she felt a sudden, chilling certainty. Geneva wasn't just a business meeting. It was a destination, an escape, and she was not going to be left behind in the dark. The moment the penthouse door clicked shut, a switch flipped within Isabelle. The placid, accommodating wife vanished, replaced by the woman she used to be: decisive, analytical, and unwilling to be played for a fool. Her mind, so long dulled by the opulent monotony of her life, raced with startling clarity. She had 2 hours. Her first call was to her driver, a loyal man named Ben, who had been with her family for years, long before Julian's meteoric rise. "Ben, it's Isabelle. I have an emergency. I need you at the front entrance in 10 minutes. And Ben, discretion is paramount." "Of course, Mrs. Sterling." There was no hesitation in his voice. Next, she moved to Julian's dressing room, a vast space of polished mahogany and designer labels. She ignored the suits and shirts, heading straight for his travel essentials. His primary briefcase was gone, of course, but he kept a secondary one, a sleek leather attaché for documents he reviewed at home. She found it tucked away in a cupboard. Her fingers trembled as she clicked it open. Inside, beneath a stack of mundane market reports, was a folder. It was thin, almost empty, but what it contained made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't financial data. It was a printout of a single email. The sender was a name she didn't recognize: Anya Petrova. The subject line was simply "Final Confirmation." The body of the email was cryptic, just a flight number and a series of account numbers, followed by the words, "All assets will be liquid and transferred upon arrival. The nest is ready. Burn the old one to the ground. Burn the old one to the ground." The words echoed in the silent room, sinister and final. This was no business trip. This was an exit plan. He was liquidating assets, preparing to run. And Anya Petrova, Isabelle's heart hammered against her ribs. The name was unfamiliar, but the implication was brutally clear. He wasn't running alone. The flight number on the email matched the one Julian's assistant had routinely sent for his Geneva trips. He was using the company jet, the magnificent Gulfstream GC650, the ultimate symbol of his success. He was using his corporate identity to mask a personal escape. Her decision solidified, hardening from a desperate impulse into an unshakable resolve. She wasn't just going to the airport. She was getting on that plane. She packed a small carry-on with essentials, her movements swift and efficient. She put on a simple but elegant cashmere travel suit, something that wouldn't look out of place in the high-stakes world she was about to crash. As she gave her reflection a final, steady look, she saw not the frightened, uncertain woman of the past few months, but a warrior steeling herself for battle. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability. It was her armor. She was fighting for more than just her own future now. Downstairs, Ben was waiting, the black Maybach purring at the curb. He held the door for her, his face a mask of professional calm, but she saw the question in his eyes. "Teterboro Airport, Ben," she said, her voice firm. "And we need to get there before the Sterling jet takes off." He nodded once, pulling smoothly into the chaotic river of New York traffic. "There's a lot of congestion this time of day, Mrs. Sterling." "I have faith in you, Ben," she replied, her gaze fixed on the skyline ahead. The drive was a blur of tortured thoughts. Every loving gesture from Julian, every promise for their future, now seemed like a carefully constructed lie. The man she had married, the man whose child she carried, was a phantom. In his place was a stranger, a man capable of burning his world to the ground for a new life with another woman. As they sped down the highway, the full, terrifying scope of his betrayal began to dawn on her. Sterling Global Investments wasn't just Julian's company. Her own family had been early significant investors. Her father, long since passed, had trusted Julian, seeing him as a protégé. If Julian was liquidating assets and running, he wasn't just destroying his own empire. He was taking her family's legacy with him. He was stealing from her family, from their unborn child. They arrived at the private aviation terminal at Teterboro with minutes to spare. Through the tinted windows, she could see the sleek white fuselage of the Gulfstream G650, its tail emblazoned with the golden S of the Sterling logo. The engines were whining, preparing for departure. The mobile staircase was still attached to the fuselage, a final beckoning invitation. "Ben, wait here," she commanded, stepping out of the car. The blast of air from the jet engines whipped at her coat. She strode across the tarmac with a confidence she didn't feel her small carry-on in hand. The ground crew, accustomed to the whims of the ultra-wealthy, barely gave her a second glance. A flight attendant, a young woman with a practiced plastic smile, stood at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Sterling, the attendant, said, her smile faltering in surprise. We weren't expecting you. My husband decided he couldn't bear to leave me behind," Isabelle said, her voice as smooth as ice. A last-minute romantic gesture. She didn't wait for an answer, pushing past the stunned attendant and stepping into the whisper-quiet cabin. And there, her world finally irrevocably shattered. The cabin was the pinnacle of bespoke luxury, cream-colored leather seats, polished walnut paneling, and gold-plated fixtures. Julian was there, standing near the galley, a glass of champagne in his hand. He was not alone. Seated in one of the plush swivel chairs was a woman. She was tall, with severe raven-black hair cut into a sharp bob and piercing blue eyes. She was wearing a tailored crimson dress that screamed power, not passion. This was not some young, vapid mistress. This was a partner. In her hand, she held a matching glass of champagne, and on the table beside her lay a briefcase that Isabelle recognized instantly. It was Julian's primary case, the one he'd supposedly taken with him. As Julian turned and saw her, his face went through a rapid, breathtaking series of transformations, from surprise to disbelief, then to a flash of pure, unadulterated fury, before settling into the familiar, slick mask of charm. It was the most honest emotion she had seen from him in months. "Isabelle," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "What a surprise. I thought you were resting." Isabelle's gaze flickered from Julian to the woman who was now watching her with a cool, unnerving amusement. "I decided I needed a trip," Isabelle said, her voice trembling only slightly as she met her husband's cold eyes. "Imagine my delight when I realized we were all heading to the same place." The cabin door hissed shut behind her. The engines roared to life, and as the plane began to taxi down the runway, Isabelle knew there was no turning back. She was trapped at 40,000 feet, with her treacherous husband, his partner in crime, and a secret that was about to blow their gilded world apart. The ascent was suffocating. As the Gulfstream GC650 tore through the clouds, the luxurious cabin, usually a sanctuary of calm, became a pressurized chamber of unspoken accusations. Isabelle took a seat directly opposite the raven-haired woman, her posture rigid. Her hands clasped over her belly, as if to shield her child from the toxicity in the air. The woman watched her, a faint, condescending smile playing on her lips. She had an air of cold European severity that made the flight attendant's chipper American demeanor seem almost farcical. "You must be the wife," the woman said, her voice a low, throaty purr, with a distinct Slavic accent. She didn't wait for a confirmation. I am Anja Petrova, the name from the email. Anja Petrova. Hearing it spoken aloud, seeing the woman who owned it, made the betrayal visceral. This wasn't a fleeting affair. This was a coup. Julian, darling, Anya said, turning her piercing gaze on him. It seems your domestic arrangements are not as tidy as your financial ones. Julian, who had been momentarily frozen, sprang back into his role as master of the universe. He moved to Isabelle's side, crouching beside her chair, forcing a look of tender concern onto his face. It was a masterful performance, but for the first time, Isabelle could see the strings. Isabelle, angel, what is this? You should be at home resting. The stress, it's not good for the baby. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away as if his touch were a flame. Don't, she whispered, her voice raw. Don't you dare talk about the baby. This is a misunderstanding, he insisted, his voice, low and urgent, meant only for her. Anja is a business associate, a crucial one. This meeting in Geneva is delicate. Her presence is required. It's not what it looks like. It was a plausible lie. Julian often worked with powerful women. But it didn't explain the email. It didn't explain the nest is ready. Burn the old one to the ground. A business associate. Isabelle's voice rose, cutting through his pretense. She looked directly at Anya. Is that what you call yourselves? Is liquidating assets a new form of corporate synergy? I'm unfamiliar with. Julian's face went pale. The mask slipped just for a second, revealing the cornered animal beneath. Anja, however, merely raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She's cleverer than you gave her credit for, Julian, Anja observed, taking a slow sip of her champagne. I told you, sentimentality was a liability. The casual cruelty of her words, the clear partnership between them, was like a physical blow. Isabelle felt the air leave her lungs. The flight attendant, sensing a marital storm of catastrophic proportions, scurried toward the galley, her face a mask of determined ignorance. Isabelle, you're being hysterical. Julian snapped, his voice hardening. He stood up, towering over her. You've been under a lot of strain. The pregnancy hormones, they're making you paranoid. Gaslighting. It was his favorite tool, one he'd used subtly for years to make her doubt her own instincts, to make her feel small and dependent. But the evidence in her memory, the key, the email, was an anchor of certainty. Was it hormones that made me find the key to your secret locker at the Aura Spa, Julian? Or was it hormones that made me read your email about your new nest? She shot back, her voice gaining strength. The mention of the email hit its mark. Julian's jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscles bulge. Anja's smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of sharp, clinical assessment. The game had changed. They knew she wasn't just suspicious, she was informed. You had no right to go through my things, Julian snarled, abandoning all pretense of concern. And you had no right to plan on bankrupting my family's legacy and running away with your business associate. Isabelle's voice cracked on the last two words, the sheer audacity of it all threatening to overwhelm her. Enough, Julian's roar filled the cabin. This discussion is over. We will talk about this when we land in Geneva. He shot a dark look at Anja, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Perhaps it is better to resolve it now, Anja said coolly. Loose ends are untidy. A chill went down Isabelle's spine. Loose ends. Was that what she and her unborn child were to them? The stalemate was broken by the quiet cough of a new arrival. Standing in the aisle was a man in a crisp pilot's uniform. He was in his late 40s, with a square jaw, short-cropped graying hair, and eyes that held a calm, steady authority. His name tag read, Marcus Thorne. He was the captain. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right back here?" Captain Thorne asked, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Julian's rage, Isabelle's distress, and Anja's cold composure. He was a man who seemed immune to the turbulence of wealth, his professionalism, an unbreachable wall. "Everything is perfectly fine," Captain Julian said, smoothing down his suit jacket and forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a passionate disagreement. My wife decided to surprise me." Captain Thorne's eyes met Isabelle's for a brief moment. In them, she saw not pity, but a flicker of intelligent appraisal. He knew this was more than a simple spat. He had flown Julian dozens of times, had likely witnessed the curated perfection of their lives from a respectful distance. Her presence here, pregnant and unannounced, was a glaring anomaly. "Very well, sir," the pilot said, his tone respectful but firm. "Flight time to Geneva is approximately 7 hours and 30 minutes. We have a clear flight path ahead. Please try to enjoy the journey." He gave a curt nod and retreated toward the cockpit, but Isabelle felt his presence linger. He was a witness, a professional bound by duty, but a man nonetheless. As soon as he was gone, Julian's demeanor shifted again. He sat down opposite Isabelle, leaning forward, his voice a venomous whisper. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed. "You have blundered into a situation you cannot possibly comprehend. This is not about a simple affair. This is about survival." "Survival?" Isabelle laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're worth billions, Julian. What could you possibly be surviving? The world you think I command is a house of cards," he said, his eyes wild with a fervor she had never seen before. "And it's about to collapse. I have a chance to get out to start again. I was going to provide for you, Isabelle. I was going to send you money. Make sure you and the child were comfortable." "Comfortable," she repeated, incredulous. "You were going to send money after you burned our entire world to the ground, after you stole from my family. It's just money. It's paper," he spat, his voice rising again. "I made it once. I can make it again. You were never meant to be a part of the new life. You with your sentimentality, your outdated morals. You belong to the old world, the one that's about to burn." The cruelty was so profound, so absolute, it left her speechless. This was the man she loved. This was the father of her child. He was discarding them like a failed business venture. Anya watched the exchange with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. She opened the briefcase on the table, revealing not clothes or personal items, but stacks of bearer bonds, hard drives, and what looked like forged passports with Julian's face and a different name. It was an escape kit, a complete identity wipe. "He is right, you know," Anja said, her voice calm and reasonable, which made her words even more terrifying. "The entire Sterling global structure is a lie, a Ponzi scheme of epic proportions that is hours away from imploding. Julian has been creative in leveraging assets that don't exist. When the markets open in Zurich tomorrow morning, the first margin call will trigger a cascade and everything will turn to dust. What we are doing is not theft. It is a severance package." Isabelle stared at the contents of the briefcase. Ponzi scheme. The words hung in the air, more shocking than any infidelity. Julian hadn't just been cheating on her. He had been cheating the entire world. His employees, his investors, the thousands of people whose pensions and savings were tied up in the illusion of Sterling Global. Her own family's fortune gone. She felt a wave of nausea, and it had nothing to do with the pregnancy. Her husband wasn't just a cheat and a liar. He was a monster, a sociopath in a bespoke suit. She looked out the window at the endless expanse of blue sky and white clouds. They were suspended between worlds in a metal tube filled with lies and treason. She had come on board to confront a cheating husband. She had stumbled into the epicenter of a financial cataclysm. And as the planes sped east, carrying them further and further from everything she knew, she realized the true horror of her situation. She wasn't on a flight to Geneva. She was on a getaway plane with two of the world's most wanted criminals, and they were just getting started. For the next hour, a fragile, toxic truce held. Julian and Anya spoke in low, urgent tones in Russian, a language they clearly assumed Isabelle didn't understand. But Isabelle's mother was a diplomat's daughter, and a childhood spent in European capitals had left her with a functional if rusty grasp of several languages. She sat perfectly still, feigning exhausted resignation, and listened. Ona wsio ported Julian hissed, his voice tight with fury. She ruins everything. Uspokojsia Anja countered, her tone like ice. Calm down. Her presence changes the timeline, not the destination. We deal with her when we arrive. The asset is more important. The asset, not their child. The asset, a bargaining chip, a piece of leverage. Isabelle's blood ran cold. They weren't planning to just leave her behind. They were planning to use her. Her mind raced, sifting through the terrifying new reality. A Ponzi scheme, a global collapse, an escape. She looked at the polished walnut table, the champagne flutes, the quiet efficiency of the cabin. It was all paid for with stolen money. She was living in the penthouse of a house of cards. She needed a plan. Crying wouldn't work. Pleading was pointless. She had one potential unknowing ally on this plane, the pilot. Captain Thorne. He was a man of procedure, of rules. A man who flew a plane registered in the United States subject to its laws. He believed he was flying his employer to a business meeting in Switzerland. He had no idea he was aiding and abetting a multi-billion-dollar heist. She had to reach him. Her opportunity came when the flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, who now looked terrified, approached to offer refreshments. "Could I have some water, please?" Isabelle asked, her voice soft and steady. "And perhaps a blanket. The cabin feels a little chilly." As Chloe leaned in to place the blanket over her, Isabelle spoke in a whisper, so faint it was barely audible above the engine hum. "I need to speak to the pilot. It's an emergency. My husband is not who he seems. The flight is not for business." Chloe's eyes widened in fear. She glanced nervously toward Julian and Anja, who were engrossed in a document from the briefcase. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod and retreated. Isabelle waited, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Had the flight attendant dismissed her as a hysterical pregnant woman, or was she too scared of Julian to act? Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Marcus Thorne was experiencing his own growing sense of unease. He was an ex-Air Force pilot, a man who had flown C-130s in and out of combat zones. He was trained to notice things that were out of place, and this flight was riddled with them. First, the unscheduled appearance of Mrs. Sterling, clearly in distress. Then the palpable tension in the cabin, thick enough to be a weather front. And now, a technical anomaly. His co-pilot, a younger man named Dave, was running a routine systems check. "That's odd," Dave said, tapping a screen on the central console. "The flight plan filed with Eurocontrol has us on a standard approach vector for Geneva-Contrin Airport." But the secondary flight log in the FMS, it's different. The Flight Management System FMS was the plane's brain. It was where the pilots programmed the intricate route from takeoff to landing. There were usually multiple logs, but they should all align. Different how Marcus asked, his voice calm, belying the sudden knot in his stomach. The final destination waypoint isn't LSGG, Dave said, referencing Geneva's airport code. It's, I don't even recognize this code, and the final approach is over the water far south of Switzerland. The coordinates point to somewhere in the Mediterranean, specifically the Ionian Sea. Marcus leaned over, his brow furrowed. The coordinates were precise. He typed them into his personal tablet, which had a satellite link to global mapping software. The pin dropped onto a tiny, privately owned island off the coast of Albania. It was a speck of land known for its seclusion, and more importantly, its status as a haven for shadowy wealth, a place with no extradition treaty with the United States or the European Union. It was a ghost destination. And look at this, Dave added, pointing to another screen. Fuel load. We're carrying an extra 10,000 pounds of fuel, way more than we need for a round trip to Geneva, but just enough to get to this island, loiter if needed, and then hop over to Dubai without refiling a flight plan. The pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. The distressed wife, the tense cabin, the secret destination, the excess fuel. This wasn't a business trip. This was a disappearance. Just then, the small intercom from the cabin buzzed. Marcus answered it. It was Chloe, the flight attendant. "Captain," she said, her voice strained, "Mrs. Sterling insisted I speak with you. She says it's an emergency. She says Mr. Sterling is planning on stealing the company and that you're not really going to Geneva." The pilot's blood went cold. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was a confirmation coming from both the technology in front of him and the human drama behind him. He was not a chauffeur for the wealthy. He was an FAA-licensed pilot in command. His ultimate responsibility was to the safety and legality of his flight. He was now knowingly piloting a getaway plane for a federal crime. "Thank you, Chloe. Stay calm. Do not engage with them. Continue your duties as normal, Marcus," commanded his voice, a mask of professionalism. He turned to his co-pilot. "Dave, lock the cockpit door, and do not under any circumstances open it without my direct voice command, code Vindicator." "Vindicator, got it," Dave said, his face grim, as he engaged the heavy-duty cockpit door lock. Marcus took a deep breath. His aircraft had been commandeered not by hijackers with guns, but by the quiet, white-collar treason of its owner. His mind, trained for crisis, began cycling through options. He couldn't turn the plane around without alerting Julian. He couldn't land in the nearest country without causing an international incident based on a suspicion. He needed proof, irrefutable proof. And Isabelle Sterling, the woman in the back of the plane, was the key. He unbuckled himself. "I'm going back there. I'm going to get a status of my passengers." "Are you sure that's wise?" Captain Dave asked. "No," Marcus said grimly, "but it's necessary." He walked out of the cockpit, closing the reinforced door securely behind him. He entered the cabin with the same calm authority as before, but now his senses were on high alert. He saw Isabelle, her face pale, but her eyes sharp and intelligent. He saw Julian and Anja huddled over their briefcase of secrets. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus began, his voice level. "Apologies for the intrusion, but air traffic control has flagged a discrepancy in our filed flight plan. I need to confirm our final destination with you." This was the test. Julian looked up, annoyance flashing across his features. Our destination is Geneva, Captain. As it always is, perhaps the French controllers are being difficult today. With all due respect, sir, this is not a controller issue. Our onboard systems show a flight path terminating at a private airstrip in the Ionian Sea. I am legally required to fly the plan that was filed with international authorities. Any deviation without cause is a serious breach of aviation law. This was it, the moment of truth. The shock wasn't just for Isabelle, it was for Julian, who had been caught. And the shock for the pilot was the sheer audacity of his employer's bold-faced lie. Anya Petrova was the one who reacted first. She slowly closed the briefcase, her blue eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. "Captain," she said smoothly, "there has been a change of plans. A sensitive corporate retreat. Your bonus for this flight will be substantial, enough to ensure your discretion and your cooperation." It was a bribe, a blatant, unapologetic attempt to buy his complicity. "My cooperation is not for sale," Ms. Petrova Marcus stated, his voice ringing with authority. "My duty is to the safety of my passengers and the integrity of this flight." "Mrs. Sterling," he said, turning his attention to Isabelle, "appears to be under significant duress. As the pilot in command, I need to ascertain her well-being." It was a brilliant move, shifting the focus to Isabelle's welfare, a non-negotiable aspect of his job. Isabelle seized the opening. "I am not well, Captain," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the silent cabin. "I am being held on this aircraft against my will by my husband, Julian Sterling, and his associate. They are fleeing the United States to escape prosecution for what I have reason to believe is a massive financial fraud. The documents in that briefcase will prove it." All eyes swung to the briefcase on the table. It was no longer just luggage, it was Exhibit A. Julian shot to his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. "You will sit down and shut up," he roared at Isabelle. He then turned on the pilot, his finger jabbing at the air. "And you fly this plane where you are told, or I swear I will ruin you. I will personally see to it that you never sit in a cockpit again." But Captain Thorne didn't flinch. He had faced down far more dangerous men than a billionaire throwing a tantrum. "You are not in command of this aircraft, Mr. Sterling." "I am Marcus," said his voice, dropping to an icy calm. "And I have reason to believe my aircraft is being used in the commission of a felony. Per international aviation protocol, I am declaring a state of emergency." Before Julian or Anya could react, Marcus turned and strode back toward the cockpit. Julian lunged for him, but he was too late. The heavy door clicked shut just as he reached it. He began pounding on the door, his expensive suit, rumpling his facade of sophistication, completely gone. "Thorne, open this door. That is a direct order," he screamed, his voice hoarse. Inside the cockpit, Marcus was already at the controls. "Dave, squawk 7700. Now!" Dave's fingers flew across the console, inputting the code. Squawking 17700 was the universal transponder code for a general emergency. It would light up air traffic control screens across Europe. It was an alarm bell to the world. "And get me a direct patch to the French authorities," Marcus commanded. "Tell them we have a situation of unlawful seizure of an aircraft by the owner and potential endangerment of a passenger. We are requesting immediate priority landing at the nearest secure airport." "Which one?" Dave asked. Marcus looked at his map. They were just passing over the coast of France. "Paris, Charles de Gaulle. It's big, it's secure, and they're used to dealing with the unexpected." He took the controls, his hands steady. The Gulf Stream banked, a gentle, graceful turn to the north that belied the chaos erupting in the cabin behind him. They were no longer heading for a ghost island in the Ionian Sea. They were heading for a confrontation with the law. Isabelle, watching the world tilt outside her window, felt the first fragile glimmer of hope. The pilot was on her side, but as she looked at Julian's enraged face and Anja's dangerously calm expression, she knew the fight was far from over. They were still trapped thousands of feet in the air in a gilded cage that was rapidly, terrifyingly beginning to fall. The moment the plane banked north, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted from tense drama to imminent danger. The civilized veneer was stripped away completely, leaving only raw, desperate ambition. Julian, realizing his screams at the cockpit door were futile, turned his fury on Isabelle. "You," he seethed, his face contorted. He stalked toward her, his movements jerky and threatening. "You couldn't just let it go. You had to play the righteous hero. You've destroyed everything," Isabelle instinctively recoiled, her arms wrapping around her stomach. "You destroyed everything, Julian, with your lies and your greed." Before he could reach her, Anja's voice cut through the air, sharp as shattered glass. "Julian, stop. Panicking is an indulgence we cannot afford." He froze, turning to her. "He's landing the plane. Anja, they'll be waiting for us. It's over." "It is not over," she replied, her composure absolute and terrifying. She stood up, smoothing down her crimson dress. She walked over to the cabin's main control panel, a small touchscreen near the galley that managed lighting, entertainment, and the internal communication system. With a few deft taps, she disabled the intercom to the cockpit. "The pilots can fly the plane, but we control the cabin. We still have the asset." Her cold blue eyes landed on Isabelle's pregnant belly. "The asset? What are you going to do?" Isabelle asked, her voice trembling. "We are going to give the good captain a reason to reconsider his course of action," Anja said. She turned to Julian. "The briefcase. Get the hard drives." Julian, seemingly revived by her sense of purpose, scrambled to the briefcase. He pulled out two small, solid-state drives. "These contain the master keys," Anja explained, as if lecturing a student. "The algorithms that can either unwind the entire scheme or accelerate its collapse. With these, we can still access the offshore accounts from any terminal in the world. But more importantly," she paused, letting the threat hang in the air, "they also contain encrypted files on certain powerful individuals, people in government, in finance, people who were silent partners in Julian's creativity, people who would be very displeased if their involvement came to light. It was blackmail material, an insurance policy. The pilot has locked us out," Julian said, still agitated. "What good does this do us now?" "He has locked himself in," Anja corrected. "He has a pregnant, distressed passenger in his care. He thinks he is being a hero. We are going to show him the cost of his heroism." She took one of the hard drives from Julian. Then she did something that made Isabelle's breath catch. She walked to the heavy main cabin door, the one they had entered through. With a surge of strength, she pulled the manual lever to override the pressure lock. A loud hiss filled the cabin as the seal was broken. An alarm, a high-pitched whoop, began to sound. In the cockpit, a red light flashed on the console. "Cabin pressure warning. Main door seal override." Dave shouted over the alarm. Marcus's head snapped up. "She's trying to open the door. At this altitude, it's suicide." He knew the door was too heavy to be opened against the massive air pressure differential, but overriding the seal was a clear and catastrophic threat. It showed a willingness to bring the entire plane down. Anja couldn't open the door, but she could create chaos. She then strode back to Isabelle. Now for the negotiation, she said. She held the small black hard drive over the gap in the door seal where the wind was now whistling with a terrifying keen. A simple message for the captain. The young flight attendant, Chloe, who had been huddled in the galley, suddenly found a spine of pure steel. "No," she cried, lunging toward Anja. Julian, anticipating the move, shoved Chloe hard. She stumbled backward, hitting her head against the galley counter with a sickening crack. She slumped to the floor, motionless. Isabelle screamed. The violence, so sudden and brutal, shattered her remaining composure. Anya ignored the scene, her focus absolute. She retrieved a satellite phone from the briefcase, another part of their escape kit, and found the aircraft's own number. She dialed. In the cockpit, the sat phone rang a sound separate from the official comms. Marcus knew it could only be them. He hesitated for a second, then answered, putting it on speaker. "This is Captain Thorne." "Captain," came Anja's chillingly calm voice. "I trust you are seeing the warnings on your console. We have a small situation back here. Your flight attendant has had a fall, and I am currently holding a hard drive that is, let's say, existentially important to your employer. I am also holding it very close to the door seal." "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice granite. "Your choices are simple," Anja said. "You can continue your heroic course to Paris, where the authorities will board the plane. In the ensuing confusion, this hard drive will unfortunately be lost, forever sucked out into the atmosphere. With it goes Julian's only chance to cooperate, and the only evidence that could implicate the very dangerous people he was in business with. People who will have long memories when it comes to the pilot who cost them everything. It was a multi-layered threat, ruin his career, and sick a shadowy cabal of criminals on him." Or, Anja continued, "You can resume our original course. Land at the agreed-upon destination. We will part ways amicably. Your flight attendant will receive the best medical care money can buy, and you will be rewarded for your flexibility." Marcus looked at his co-pilot Dave, whose face was ashen. He looked at the unconscious flight attendant on the cabin camera feed, and he looked at Isabelle, who was now standing alone, facing down both Julian and Anja. He made his decision. "I am not negotiating with you," Marcus said into the phone, his voice echoing with finality. "This flight is landing at Charles de Gaulle. That is my final word." He hung up the phone. Anja's face, for the first time, registered a flicker of disbelief, quickly replaced by cold fury. "Fool," she whispered. She looked at Julian. "There is one asset left." Julian understood immediately. He turned toward Isabelle, his eyes devoid of any past affection. She was no longer his wife. She was leverage. But Isabelle had been watching, listening, thinking. She was not a victim in a cage. She was a mother, protecting her child. As Julian lunged for her, she acted on pure adrenaline. She sidestepped his clumsy grab and shoved with all her might. Julian, off balance and enraged, stumbled sideways. He crashed into the small, elegant bar, sending crystal glasses shattering to the floor. Isabelle didn't wait. She ran, not for the back of the plane, but for the front, for the galley. She snatched the heaviest object she could find, a metal coffee carafe, and stood her ground beside the unconscious form of Chloe. "Stay away from me!" she screamed, her voice raw with a protective fury she didn't know she possessed. Julian got to his feet, a shard of glass having cut his cheek. He wiped the blood away, a feral look in his eyes. He and Anja began to advance on her two predators, closing in on their prey in the narrow confines of the fuselage. The plane suddenly lurched, throwing them all off balance. In the cockpit, Marcus had made another command decision. Dave, initiate a rapid descent. Declare a medical emergency for the flight attendant. That gives us priority over everyone. Descending now, the nose of the Gulf Stream dipped sharply. The sensation was like falling a controlled plummet that pressed everyone against their seats. Alarms screamed in the cockpit and cabin. The change in pressure made their ears pop. It was a violent, jarring maneuver designed to get them on the ground as fast as humanly and mechanically possible. Isabelle gripped a handhold, the coffee pot held like a weapon. Julian and Anya struggled to stay upright, their advance halted by the steep angle of descent. Outside the windows, the serene blue sky was replaced by a fast-approaching blanket of grey clouds. They were plunging back to Earth. Anya, ever the pragmatist, seemed to realize their window of opportunity was closing with every 1,000 feet they dropped. Blackmail and threats were useless now. All that was left was escape. The parachutes, she yelled to Julian over the roar of the descent. Isabelle's heart stopped. Parachutes, Julian's eyes lit up with renewed hope. He scrambled toward a large storage closet at the rear of the cabin, the one that supposedly held extra blankets and catering supplies. He wrenched it open. Inside were not blankets, but two high-tech, military-grade parachute packs. It was the final insane detail of their meticulous escape plan. They had intended to bail out over their private island, leaving the plane to crash into the sea on autopilot, erasing all evidence. They were going to jump. As Julian pulled the packs out, Anya turned to Isabelle one last time. There was no emotion in her eyes, only cold calculation. "You should not have followed him," she said. Then she and Julian began strapping themselves in their movements practiced and efficient. They were going to abandon the plane, leaving Isabelle, the unconscious Chloe, and the two pilots to face whatever came next. The plane broke through the cloud cover. The patchwork of the French countryside spread out below them, shockingly close. Isabelle could see roads, farmhouses, the glint of the Seine. "They're at the rear emergency exit," Dave yelled in the cockpit, watching the cabin feed. "They're going to blow the hatch." Marcus's hands were steady on the controls. "Let them. It'll be the French authorities' problem to catch them. Our job is to land this bird." Anya and Julian, now fully kitted out, moved to the rear emergency exit. Julian held a small canister, a pressure charge to blow the door. He looked at Isabelle one last time, a strange mix of regret and contempt on his face. "I told you I was going to provide for you," he shouted over the wind. Then he armed the charge. Isabelle Yole could do nothing but watch her knuckles white as she gripped the carafe. This was the end of Julian Sterling, not with a whimper in a courtroom, but with a bang somewhere over France. With a deafening roar, the emergency hatch blew outward, ripped from the fuselage and tumbling into the sky. A violent, explosive decompression sucked the air from the cabin. Loose papers, napkins, and the shattered remains of the crystal glasses swirled in a chaotic vortex and were instantly vacuumed out into the wake of the plane. Anya, braced against the bulkhead, went first, a sleek, crimson figure disappearing into the sky. Julian followed a second later. He was gone. The cabin was a maelstrom of roaring wind and debris. Isabelle huddled on the floor, protecting her head, the world reduced to a single terrifying scream of air. The plane shuddered violently, fighting the sudden change in its aerodynamics. In the cockpit, Marcus wrestled with the controls, his entire body straining to keep the damaged aircraft stable. "I have control," he grunted, his voice a testament to sheer willpower. "Gear down. Prepare for landing." Through the screaming wind and the chaos, Isabelle looked out the gaping hole in the side of her gilded cage. She saw two small figures receding against the vast, indifferent sky. She was free of them. But as the runway lights of Charles de Gaulle Airport rushed up to meet them, she knew that while one nightmare was over, another was just beginning. The landing was not graceful. It was a controlled crash, a testament to Captain Thorne's iron will and decades of experience. The Gulf Stream, wounded and screaming, hit the tarmac hard, bounced once, and then settled as Marcus engaged the reverse thrusters and brakes with everything he had. The aircraft shuddered to a halt, surrounded almost instantly by a swarm of flashing blue and red lights. Airport police, gendarmerie, and emergency medical teams converged on the plane like antibodies attacking a virus. The moment the engines spooled down, the sudden silence was more deafening than the preceding chaos. Isabelle was still huddled on the floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. The gaping hole in the fuselage was a raw wound, the Parisian dawn filtering through it. The main cabin door was wrenched open from the outside. The first people to enter were not police, but paramedics in heavy jackets. One made a beeline for Chloe, the flight attendant, who was beginning to stir, a moan escaping her lips. Another knelt beside Isabelle. "Madame, are you injured?" he asked in gentle, accented English. "My baby," was all Isabelle could whisper, her hands still protectively shielding her stomach. "I'm pregnant." She was carefully helped to her feet and guided down the staircase onto the solid, reassuring ground of the tarmac. They wrapped her in a thick blanket, shielding her from the morning chill and the prying lenses of the news cameras that had already begun to assemble at the perimeter. As she was led toward an ambulance, the cockpit door finally opened. Captain Marcus Thorne emerged, his uniform impeccable, but his face etched with a profound exhaustion. His co-pilot Dave followed, looking pale and shaken. Marcus's eyes scanned the chaos on the tarmac until they found Isabelle. He walked over to her, his expression a mixture of professional concern and deep human respect. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice steady. "Are you all right?" Isabelle could only nod, tears finally streaming down her face. They were not tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming, shattering relief. "You saved us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I was doing my duty," he replied simply, though they both knew it had been much more than that. "You were the brave one." In the hours and days that followed, the story of Flight 714 became a global sensation. It was a lurid, irresistible tale of greed, betrayal, and high-altitude drama. The French authorities, acting on information provided by Captain Thorne and the frantic alerts from American agencies, had launched a massive manhunt. Anja Petrova, the consummate professional, had vanished without a trace, her parachute descent seemingly into thin air. But Julian, less experienced and stripped of his usual resources, was not so lucky. He was found 2 days later, hiding in a barn in a rural village, his bespoke suit ruined, and his face a mask of haggard desperation. The images of his capture, the billionaire titan, brought low, handcuffed, and covered in mud, were plastered across every news outlet on the planet. The collapse of Sterling Global Investments was as swift and catastrophic as Anja had predicted. It sent shockwaves through the financial world, a house of cards tumbling down in spectacular fashion. The words Ponzi scheme were on everyone's lips. Thousands of employees lost their jobs, and investors big and small saw their fortunes evaporate overnight. Isabelle's world had been burned to the ground just as the email had promised. The penthouse, the art, the cars, it was all seized as assets of a criminal enterprise. Her bank accounts were frozen. The Sterling name, once a symbol of power and success, was now a synonym for disgrace. But amidst the wreckage, Isabelle found a strange sense of liberation. She had lost everything she thought she wanted, only to find what she actually needed: herself. She cooperated fully with the authorities, from the FBI to the SEC. Her testimony, combined with the encrypted hard drive Anja had foolishly left behind in her haste, was the nail in Julian's coffin. It contained the master keys Anja had spoken of, and forensic teams used them to unravel the entire sordid web of crime implicating powerful figures Julian had once called his friends. Her family's investment was gone, but her family's honor was intact. She had salvaged their legacy from the smoldering ruins of Julian's greed. 6 months later, Isabelle was no longer living in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. She was in a modest but comfortable brownstone in Brooklyn, one she had bought with the last of her own money funds from before she had ever met Julian Sterling. The media frenzy had died down, replaced by the quiet rhythms of a new life. She stood by a window, looking out at a tree-lined street, bouncing her newborn daughter in her arms. She had named her Hope. The world of private jets and champagne felt like a dream from another lifetime. She had been through the fire and emerged not unscathed, but remade. She was no longer Isabelle Sterling, the billionaire's wife. She was Isabelle Thorne, having reclaimed her maiden name, a name that now, by a strange twist of fate, she shared with the pilot who had helped save her life. She had received a single handwritten letter from Marcus Thorne a month after the incident. It was short and professional, wishing her well and stating that he was proud to have flown with her. She kept it tucked away in a safe place. Her life was no longer about assets and empires. It was about diaper changes and first smiles, about building something real and lasting, something that couldn't be liquidated or stolen. She had crashed Julian's flight, and in doing so, had crashed her own life. But from the wreckage, she was learning how to fly on her own. And as she looked down at the sleeping face of her daughter, she knew with an unshakable certainty that her real journey had just begun. What an insane, terrifying ride! From a luxurious New York penthouse to a desperate fight for survival at 40,000 feet, Isabelle's story shows that the most dangerous secrets often hide behind the most glittering facades. She boarded that plane searching for a simple truth, and instead uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest echelons of power. She faced the ultimate betrayal, not from an enemy, but from the man who was supposed to be her partner for life, the father of her child. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have had the courage to confront a man like Julian? To stand up to him when the whole world you knew was falling apart? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of deception, resilience, and a mother's fierce courage had your heart pounding, please show your support by hitting that like button. Make sure you share this video with someone who loves a story they won't be able to forget. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you don't miss our next dive into the world of high-stakes drama.